Coffee with the Coastie is brought to you by On the Coast Publications, the publishing house for On the Coast families and On the Coast over 55 community magazines on the central coast of New South Wales. Welcome to Coffee with the Coastie. Today we had the pleasure of chatting with Central Coast local Peter Lee. Peter is a graphic designer, illustrator, corporate event and entertainment producer who at 76 refuses to retire. Last year, he released the first book in a series titled Little Dino Dudes that are devoted to teaching our kids basic social values, as well as a music single in aid of the Australian Wildlife Conservancy. He is a proud father of 5 children, 2 of which are under 10 and 3 grandchildren. There is no doubt this is a driving force behind Peter still writing and illustrating children's books today, and not looking at slowing down anytime soon. Peter has shared with me that his message is that age is just a number. Provided we have good health, there is no reason we should consider ourselves to be over the moon. So without further ado, welcome Peter.
G'day, Luke. How are you? I have to correct you right from the start.
All right, correct me from the start.
Well, because this is a competition in some people's minds, I'm 77, not 76. So
77.
every 12 months becomes more and more important.
There we go. So when was your birthday?
1945.
What month?
September.
There you go. That's why. So all the information I had was pre-September.
Ah!
So you were still 76 when I was reading about
you. Oh, dear.
So I'd like to start in England, where you grew up and served as a PA for the Iranian naval attaché, where you were a silver service waiter to the Beatles, amongst other celebrities at the time, and later emigrated from England to Australia. Can you tell me a little bit about this time and what brought you to Australia and then on to the Central Coast?
Sure. Well, first of all, the Iranian embassy was much later, because in my growing up years, I was born and bred in Plymouth in England. And my father passed away when I was about 8 or 9 years old. So I grew up in a family of a mother and 2 sisters, both whom are, well, my mother passed on some time ago. Otherwise, she'd be something like 105 right now, and she wouldn't look the same. But my 2 sisters are alive and well over in England. But of course, it became important for me to start earning some money to bring into the family. So at about 14 years old, I was doubling up on weekends in a restaurant, a very well-known restaurant in Plymouth, as a waiter. And then when I went through art college in Plymouth for a couple of years, I worked and built up to become a silver service waiter there. And then it became my introduction to go to London from a dear friend that I went to school with, who called me up one day and said, "I don't suppose you're interested in the job? We've got a job as a typographic designer available at this company I'm working with, George Rainbird in London." And I sort of said yes. Of course, that was a huge move. I'm not a very, what I would call a particularly brave guy. I mean, if you have to ask me to jump on a kite and jump off a cliff, I'd be the last person to go. And so how I ever left the comfort of mother and sisters in home to go to a place that was renowned for having its pavements paved in gold, a city paved in gold, with all sorts of criminals activity on every corner of the street. This is the reputation that London had to all us people. You've got to remember that Plymouth was 240 miles southwest of London. Nobody ever travelled 50 miles out of Plymouth unless they had a weekender. You know, I mean, we took a packed case to stay for the weekend if we travelled more than 50 miles. I mean, we didn't have cars for a start. I mean, too far for a family to go out on push bikes. But we didn't have cars, and so for me to decide that I was going to go and leave home, Mum's cooking and all the rest of it. My mother was a brilliant cook. My sisters were too, by the way. But then to travel all the way up to London, 240 miles away, 7 hours on a train, whatever. But I did, and I got the job. So that got me to London from Plymouth.
And then to Australia, onto Australia and to the Central Coast?
Well, a lot happened in London before coming to Australia. as I said, I was employed by a company called George Rainbird. They were a fine art publishing company, and amongst all the big publishers like Michael Joseph, Hamish Hamilton, all these big companies, they were the company that produced the fine art books for those publishers because of their expertise. But one day, some guy had come to talk to them about producing books for him, and they had said no. And this is where something I've got two people living with me. I've got a fellow on my left shoulder and a fellow on my right, and they've been there all my life. They don't agree. One person says one thing, the other person says another, but between them and me, we come to a decision as to what we're going to do. And so I got up off my chair and I followed this guy out into Edgware Road. And I stopped him and I said, "Excuse me, sir." He looked very, very, he was a scientist. He looked every inch of it, let me tell you. And, spiry white hair and, that sort of foggy look where he's looking at you but not looking at you, that type of person. And I said, "I understand that you're looking for somebody to produce these books." Well, within the next half hour, I had the job of design and production manager for David Rendell and Associates at Bond Street in London. And I left George Rainbird's, and I'm in my own room with my own new studio of equipment in Bond Street. Not long afterwards, a company moved in called Youngblood Records. Mickey Dallon and the Dallonaires. He'd made so many records apparently and quite successful, so he decided to go out on his own and produce this label, Youngblood. And they came down to me and said, would I start doing some album sleeves for them and photography of the groups, and I would do Badfinger and all various bands that were around at the time. And it was a bit of freelance for me in my studio, which was good because David Rendell called me in one day and said, "Peter, I'm sorry, but," he said, "we're not really selling books and I'm going to have to close down." And I said, "Well, David, I'm really sad to hear that, but if you want to produce books like Cybernetics and Everyday Affairs or The Queen's Cardiologist or books of this nature, how do you expect anybody to buy them and how do you expect to continue as a publisher?" So we agreed to depart. And Youngblood Records turned around and said, "Would you move your studio upstairs to our premises?" Which I did. And they then were really my client, my very first client. And I started a little company called Focal Graphic and went on from there, worked for Youngblood, half of it doing album sleeves, the other half going up to the recording studios during the day and listening to the various artists that had recorded. It was wonderful, and it was a highlight, But all sorts of things would happen. I'd be in my studio working, minding my own business, and Cam, working on reception, would call me up and say, "Mickey's office, 10 minutes." And the same message would go out to all the songwriters in the building, and we'd all meet at Mickey Dallon's place in 10 minutes. And he'd say, "Right, you scruffy lot, I'm going to go and buy you all suits." And he'd take us up to Carnaby Street and we'd all be suited out in Carnaby Street. Or another time it would be, "I noticed you all got lousy haircuts." And he would take us around to Mayfair and book us all in, and I'd have somebody cutting my hair and somebody else manicuring my hands. And I'd look over to my left and Goo was sitting there, Peter Sellers. So, unbelievably wonderful things that happened. Except the day that he said, "Come on, guys, we're all going down to the Scots of St James's." Now, for those who are not familiar with the Scots of St James's, to this very day, it's a notorious club in the St James's area of London. And we'd already had a few sherbets at the Edgware Road pub. And we all dived down to the Scots of St James's. But what was happening here was on two levels. Number one, we were all very well and happy, thank you very much. We'd had plenty to drink. But the Scots of St James's worked on the basis that people walked down, it was downstairs, it was sort of a basement type club. People would come down, and very first thing to do would be some good looking young lady would come up and say, "Good day, good evening, sir. Would you like to buy me a drink?" And so the idea was that they made you spend all your money on buying drinks for off them and everything else. But of course, we had too many to drink, and we'd say, not right now, thanks, love. We'll have one in a minute. And so we weren't drinking enough. We were actually filling up and taking over the atmosphere of the club, and so a fight broke out. And the next thing I know, I got stabbed in the back, and I didn't know how bad this stabbing was, so I fell to the ground like the typical West Country coward would do. And I fell to the ground, face to the floor, and the bouncers picked me up, and I could remember seeing the stairs going past my nose as they opened the swing doors with my head and threw me out onto the cobbled pavement outside, which were wet because it was raining. And I'm still staying on my face, even though I was quite conscious. I was staying on my face because I was hoping that I could hear that they'd gone. When all of a sudden, my brother-in-law spun me over and said, "Pete, Pete, Pete." And he's looking at me, and all of a sudden he sees blood all on my face, and he goes, "Oh my God," and he hangs onto his neck because the blood was coming from him. He'd been nicked under the chin as well, because they used to use these knuckle duster type knives, which they punch with, which can penetrate 2 or 3 inches into your skin, but hopefully not kill you. Anyway, I digress in as much that was the sort of experience I had with young blood, and it was wonderful.
And how did you end up in Australia?
Well, because I sold my company out, and I was writing to different companies. I'd written to, because I was freelancing for Disney magazine in London as well. And I thought, well, I've been drawing for Disney magazine for some time. Maybe a job opportunity would. So I wrote to America to Disney. That was a no-go. Another mate of mine that actually was writing to it for a job with the Saudi Arabian Airlines, and that sounded exciting. So I actually wrote to them as well. That was a no-go. And I have no idea why I wrote to Australia, but I ended up by writing to a company called Whitcomb and Toombs in Australia, and they were a New Zealand company with an Australian base. And he wrote back to me saying they weren't looking for anybody at the moment, but he had passed my resume on to Jacaranda Press in Brisbane. And next thing I know, I've got an offer from Jacaranda Press CEO offering me the job as studio manager with a salary that was like unbelievable compared to what I was getting in England. So that opened the way for me to think about coming to Australia. But in the meantime, I had taken on a job as a personal assistant to a colonel at the naval attaché of the Iranian embassy. Now, how the heck I got that job, I don't know, because my hair was like halfway down my shoulders, and I never wore suits. All the drivers of the embassy all wore caps and suits, blue suits or whatever it was. I always wore something like a rusty grey suit with long hair, and I became the personal assistant to the colonel, and everybody called me Mr. Peter. Oh, Mr. Peter could do this, or Mr. Peter could do that. But I was somebody different, and they treated me as such. And I had some incredible experiences with the Iranian embassy, I can tell you, including having breakfast in the morning with Princess Fatima, that's the Queen Shah's sister, in the kitchen of the colonel's place. She'd be staying there on her trip to London, and from London, and the granny would make up all this breakfast and invite me to sit and join with them.
Yeah. So you went to Brisbane first, I'm guessing then?
I got the job with Jacaranda Press, and I came out to Australia. But I had cousins living in Brisbane anyhow, so that was they actually sponsored us. They had a hotel in Vulture Street. Now, that hotel used to be called Matrimonial Lodge because so many people met there and got married that they called it Matrimonial Lodge. But I lived there for a while until we found our own place at St. Lucia, and moved to this apartment in St. Lucia. So I was working for Jacaranda, and before I started my own business in Brisbane, which wasn't that much later. It was less than about a year and a half after joining Jacaranda, I started my own business, Spot Graphics, and that became quite a very busy studio in Brisbane. We would produce artwork for advertising agencies in Perth as well, believe it or not, who would use us, who wanted artwork done and be ready by the next day. So we ran sort of night shifts, and artists' briefs would come in 5 o'clock when most people were going home to us. We'd have it all ready for the agency by the next morning.
And how'd you end up on the Central Coast?
Ended up on the Central Coast. Well, yeah, I'll really cut right through here.
We'll go straight there.
Yeah, go right to the Central Coast. Well, I was building swimming pools in Brisbane, and a friend from Jacaranda Press died, and I went to the funeral, and the publishing manager met up with me after all these years at the funeral and said, "What am I doing up there? Why aren't I working with them?" So they invited me to Gosford, to Scholastic, and I moved to Gosford to become the art director of Lucky Magazine with Scholastic, and that sort of rolled into becoming the marketing art director for the company, which I was doing everything really.
Well, talking about art directing, so I've been lucky enough to see, I'm going to say, where the magic takes place when you put pen to paper, and your illustrations are amazing. Were you always artistic from a young age?
Pretty much. I think I've still got a drawing somewhere in the archives what I did when I was about 3. It was a cow with 4 square legs. It probably looked more like a sort of out of proportion bulldog, but anyway, yeah, it was always there. But it always used to fight with me with my love for sports. I mean, I played rugby union. I was a gymnast. I loved everything athletic. I saw myself following a lot of my members of my family into the army. Had a little bit to do with the territorial army, but never went into mainstream army, of course. I just missed out on the call-up in those days. My year was the wrong year. But yeah, always, I decided in the end to follow art rather than the athletic side into the army.
Yeah, so it's always been there. And then so you worked as both a graphic design and art director roles before going on to produce and direct shows and corporate events. How did you go from the design illustrator type roles to producing and directing shows?
That really happened at Scholastic more than anything else, because as the art director there, I had to do absolutely everything and anything that came along. You know, like it was not unusual for me to have 30 plus jobs on my plate. And some of those jobs may well have been brochures, but other jobs may well have been exhibitions. And so I used to design all the company's exhibitions, and the big international book fair exhibition. I took out 5 years in a row the Stand Award for that. And one of the features was the designing of their travelling children's literature show called the Drom Keen exhibition. And that was given a lot of profile. The Australia Post were the major sponsors of it, and they provided a whole truck that was specially designed to carry this exhibition, which went and toured New Zealand, Australia, New Zealand, and America.
And you actually toured with that?
No, I didn't do the tour with it. I designed it. I went to a lot of the exhibitions because I had to some degree, put the exhibition up because nobody knew how to do it or wanted to know how to do it, let's put it that way.
Yeah.
And so I did do a lot of that. I'm talking about traveling to Tasmania and Adelaide and places like that, putting it up. But I didn't do the overseas tours because the marketing manager of the company, husband, was a very practical guy, and he used to help me, and he traveled with them and did the stand direction. But it got a lot of accolades, that particular exhibition stand. And we're talking about an exhibition of the artwork, the original artwork of people like May Gibbs and, Graham Bass, Animalia, and so on and so forth, you know.
Yeah, I remember having Animalia as a kid.
Snuggle Pie.
We've still got Animalia.
Yeah.
You know, find the little guy through the whole book.
That's not Animalia flying the little guy. That's another
Yeah,
series.
not Where's Wally?
Oh, where's Wally? Yeah.
No, in Animalia, I'm
Oh, in
sure.
Animalia,
Animalia's
his
got
puzzles within
in
the
in
artwork.
within the thing. There's always a little
Yeah,
guy
you're
in
right. You're right.
in
He set.
Animalia.
I think he was a trendsetter in doing that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I remember, like in amongst all the dragons and all that sort of stuff, there'd be
Yeah.
a little guy somewhere. There'd be a person
Yeah.
somewhere.
No, he was unbelievable. He went on to do many different books, of course, in the series of Animalia. But I got to meet Sir Francis Chichester, who was the first guy to circumnavigate in his little gypsy moth um, sailing boat all the way around Australia. And I not only met him, but later in the years I was in London, I was producing his London Man and London Woman diaries.
Yeah,
So it's funny how the world sort of crosses around like that, How you,
the 6 degrees of separation of everything.
yeah, exactly, yeah.
Yeah. Having produced and directed some amazing shows, which one or two are you most proud of?
Oh, I'd have to scale that, I suppose,
All right, we can
because I,
scale it.
well, I could say that the biggest and the grandest and the ones with the biggest stage presence would be the one shows or the show or shows that I should be most proud of. But it isn't actually, because remember that I'm an artist basically working for Scholastic, and we did a feature on a little girl who had won the Junior Magician of the Year award, a prestigious award within the Magic Circle. And she was a local in Gosford, and her grandfather was a guy called Cole Palmer, who was the very first magician ever on Australian television. He was the opening act, shall we say, for Jack Davy. So he was one of the finest close-up sleight-of-hand magicians that you could wish to meet. And we decided at Scholastic to do a feature on him and the little girl for the Lucky magazine. And so I got the job of actually pulling it all together and going over to Cole Palmer's house in Terrigal and bringing it all together. But as I was speaking to him, I was even more amazed at who this guy was, and living on the coast in the background that he had as a magician. So I thought I started talking to him about maybe we should start doing a bit of a tribute to you. And next thing I know, he's introduced me to Bobby Lim, who was an old friend of his, and he's introduced me to all sorts of people. And I started to compile a list of what was possible to do a tribute show. So what had happened is that the Laycock Street Museum, Laycock Street Theatre, beg your pardon, museum, God help us. Laycock Street Theatre had not long opened, and Scholastic was a major sponsor of that theatre along with the Gosford Council. They had put in, and remember we're talking now in the 80s, mid 80s, they had donated something like $50,000+ to the theatre. Me, big old me, art director Pete, suddenly finds $500 to sponsor the theatre with. Now, $500 was a lot of money in those days. It certainly defeated my salary. But anyway, I donated it. And in the theatre to this very day, there is an inscribed plaque in the foyer of all the people who sponsored to the theatre. And on the bottom of the list, last name actually inscribed, is Peter Lee, $500. I'm very proud of that. But anyway, cut a long story short, I had a connection with the theatre. And so when I asked them if I could book the theatre, they agreed to do it. And I never knew my limitations because I'd never done anything like this before. So there were no warning signs. You can't do this, you can't do that. I probably did absolutely everything wrong in the eyes of a theatre producer. But I put on a very big show with a full house, with Lord Mayors in the theatre, in the thing, Bobby Lim comparing. I've Been Everywhere Man. I've Been Everywhere Man's Jeff Mack, who wrote I've Been Everywhere Man, and Tabby, his darling wife, who was one of the original Tivoli dancers, put on an act called Ballet of 1,000 Years, and there we have a whole stage full of people north of 70 and probably just south of 90 who were all the original Tivoli dancers, and they were all on stage doing their thing and I was up at the bio box, working with the sound and lighting people. And all of a sudden, this at the end of this particular routine, this girl who was apparently 83 did the full splits on stage. And I do apologise for getting my mic that I used for announcements and going on the mic just at the right time. So yeah, it was that was my introduction to theatre, and then from then it just all happened. I started my own theatre restaurant show in Avoca, and ran that for about 2 years, I suppose, 18 months, something like that, and then got approached by the Ettalong Beach War Memorial Club, who came to that show and had such a good time. They asked me if I would move it into Brisbane Water Charts, which became Iguanas, and now it's something else. And I ran it there for 2 years. But theatre was in my blood, and anything putting on a show.
And so more of those the smaller theatre things you were most proud of.
Well, yeah, just that need to get out there and entertain, I suppose.
Yeah.
It was in the blood. It was in the family. I had in the family line, my grandfather right the way through to all great aunts and cousins were all concert pianists or orchestra leaders.
Do you play an instrument yourself?
That's a good question. Do I play an instrument? Because I've always said to people that if they've got a room where people won't go home, give me a call and I'll come and play the mouth organ.
So the answer to that is not really.
But in truth, I do love playing the harmonica. But I wouldn't call myself a musician. No.
Yeah,
I've played I've gigged with people from time to time, but I'm not what I call a front person on an instrument. Very, very much in the rear with the volume turned off.
So, and I suppose then, that's probably the what you're most proud of. I think we've both spoken about it before, but the biggest event that you've ever produced or put on.
The biggest that's an amazing question, actually, because I'd have to be absolutely honest, even though it sounds as though I'm blowing my own trumpet here, but I really am not. I was in an extremely unique position with Aristocrat. Aristocrat are, even to this day, probably amongst the top two outside of IGT in America, poker machine manufacturers in the world. In Australia, most certainly, being an Australian company, they occupied 70+% of the market. So here we have a company who have a worldwide interest. And I'm now, through a story on it, a complete story that's worth hearing, really, but anyway, we ain't got the time now, how I even got that job in the first place. But here I am, the international promotions and marketing, not marketing in terms of selling machines, but in terms of promoting and services to the marketing department of a company that's international, worldwide. That's the same thing, of course. Yeah. But and I've got control of spend that nobody came up and told me. I never worked with a committee. There was no committee. Nobody ever said, oh, we're about to spend $500,000 on this launcher. We need to form a committee to do it. No, I was just told that we had to launch this machine, and I went off and made it happen. And they were so busy going from one CEO to the next CEO to the next CEO, all of whom would come into the company and spend most of their time trying to find out what was going on under their international company operation, that nobody had time to come down to my office and say, Pete, what are you doing for the Australian Gaming Expo this year? Or what are you doing for that? I just sat on the Gaming Expo on behalf of Aristocrat for close on 6 years. Because I had more money to spend, or more seemingly money to spend than anybody else, I made my mind up what size stand I want, where I wanted it, and everybody else had to go and fight amongst themselves for what was left. And so I produced some things, some launches and some shows that are beyond belief, really.
Yeah, I think we've spoken about it before, and you've shown me pictures and so forth. I related it to like Michael Jackson producing Thriller, like it was in the '90s when nothing like that will probably ever happen again.
No, it won't happen again. Things have changed, and I mean, I've been to clubs, and I sat on the Australian Paralympic team for Team 2000, and I did the launch of it. But it was again a committee. I launched the Bankstown Ballroom, massive job. I employed the Sydney Symphony Orchestra for it. Again a committee, Whereas an Aristocrat, I couldn't have done the job if I had to work with committee. I'm a committee of one. Yeah, we all like to say we're team workers. If you don't say you can work with a team, people look down on you. Yeah, I could work with a team as long as they did what I want my way, because there's only one creative. Everybody else wants to be something, but they're not the creative. They're not the one who can see the big picture. And I used to be prepared to see the big picture and take the responsibility that went along with it. And I tell you what, the reason why I got it all done was simply because a guy called Len Ainsworth, bless his heart, still alive today, 96 years old, who started Aristocrat, left Aristocrat for political reasons, about launching poker machines in North America, went on and built another company up, almost as big as his first company. And he's my inspiration. If you want to say who's my inspiration, it's not anybody who inspired me creatively, really. It's a guy who showed me that you don't give up. I mean, at 70 years old, he took a tandem jump with a parachute thing, and that was his way of celebrating 70 years, starting a new company and making it almost as big as his first company. This guy is still at 96 alive today. I'm 77, he's 96. I got a way to go.
Yeah, you have.
I got a way to go.
So you must have worked with some talented people in the entertainment industry. Who's been the most memorable and why?
Whew. I'd have to really think about this one, because I do actually, because some things you can pull out at the top of your head, and others you can't. I've had some amazing people I've worked with: Christina New, Yothu Yindi, Leo Sayer, David Campbell, so on and so on and so on. Wendy Matthews, Bobby Lim, of course, we were working together on a few projects too. But the one thing that I remember above any of them, I think, is Don Lane, because a friend of mine who passed away a while back, a very, very respected musical director, Barry Heidenreich, his name. But Barry was Don Lane's musical director, and they did a duo show that they took all over the place. And in this instance, I'm actually staging the show for them. I booked them, and I'm staging the show for them up at Tuncurry. And I'd actually been employed as a consultant for the building of this new auditorium up there, because the builders actually didn't get it right on the previous club. And I was working on this situation on this new stage, and I booked Don Lane. But the stage was so big that for Don and the pianist would have looked like a pimple on an elephant's back. So I actually draped the stage area to be more intimate.
Yeah.
And because I very much love lighting, I'm very much a lighting guy in shows, and I get really, more than annoyed when I see people come in with massive lighting rigs, and then some jerk lighting operator sits there, and you've almost got to tap him on the shoulders to tell him to change the lights. So I love mood lighting. If there's a ballad, I like to bring the lighting to suit the ballad. If it's up tempo, I like to have that. And if it's, if you're singing Les Mis song or something, you're down on your knees doing the prayer or whatever, I like to hone in on with the spotlight. So I believe that adds a lot to a show. So with Don Lane, there were moments, highs and lows, warmth and shade in his show. And I got this from Barry. So I'd spend a fair bit of time not only draping the stage to be more intimate, but also getting the lighting that I could operate to work with what he was going to sing. Anyway, I'm up on the stage. I laid all umpteen miles of blooming cable and gaffer taped them down and all the rest of it. And Barry comes up to me, bless him, loved Barry in the day. Shared many a wine with him. And Barry said, Pete, Pete, the piano. He played a keyboard, Barry.
Yeah.
He said, mate, it's on the wrong side. And I said, what do you mean, the wrong side, Barry? He said, well, the piano should be over there. Now, we're talking about like a V-shaped of curtaining, right, going towards the front stage to the backstage.
Yeah.
And the piano's on one side of the curtains, but he wants it on the other. And there's only him and Don Lane in the show. So I said to him, what difference does it make if it's over there, Barry? He said, well, there's this part in the show where Don comes up, puts his arm on my shoulder and we talk through this number and I play it for him.
Yeah.
There's a sort of a pregnant pause and of silence. And I said to him, why can't he bloody well put the other arm on your other shoulder and say the same thing over there?
Yeah.
Oh, well, it's not the way we really used to doing it. And I was livid. I really was. And I had one of those moments where I went, all right, you want the lights over there? I'll bloody well put them over there. And I'm ripping cables up and I'm taking gaffer. You know what gaffer tape's like?
Yeah.
If you lift the cables up wrong, the gaffer tape wraps around and you can't get the gaffer tape off the cable. And all this is going on, And anyway, I'm at this point rewiring and rechanging everything along. And I'm at this particular moment behind one of the curtains doing some of the gaffering down. When I hear Don and Barry come onto the stage, but they didn't know I was behind the curtain. And Don's going, is Pete really upset? And Barry said, look, yeah, he's a bit annoyed, but, this is the way you want it. Oh, I don't want to upset him, with that, I came out the front and I said, it's changed now, and that's the way it's going to bloody be. I didn't give a monkey's. Don Lane, whatever. So shortly after that, I'm in having a bit of a break and a bit of snack, and Barry comes in after me. Peter, we got Don's in agony. I said, what do you mean Don's in agony? He said he's in his dressing room and he's really in agony. He's got his ingrown toenail and he's really suffering. Can we do something about it?
Yeah.
So I went into the changing room and Don's sitting in his chair with his foot up on another chair with his socks off and his feet there with his big red toe with an ingrown toenail. And to see this icon sitting in that position with his bloody toe up on a stage, and I went, oh, Don. I said, look, I don't have any first aid, but I do have my toolkit. And I went outside and I got some tissues and my roll of gaffer tape. And here I am on my hands and knees at Don Lane's feet, gaffer taping tissue around his big toe. And then giving him my shoulder as he hobbled with me down to my truck. Now, this is a truck. This is not a car. It's not a van. It's a truck. I'm helping him up into my truck and driving him to his motel where he could have a couple of hours rest before I sent a car to pick him up to come back for the show. And all I know is that I got the report that Don Lane had said to Barry, I want him on every one of my shows.
Wow, that's fascinating.
So I have to
That's
say
that's a pretty random story.
it's a random story, isn't it?
That's pretty cool. That's good. Now, some people may not believe it, that you have 5 children, including a 14-year-old son and a boy and girl 6-year-old twins. You may correct me on the ages here because I may have got them wrong again. But what is being a father in your 70s like? And do you have any words of advice or wisdom for someone having children later in life?
Yeah, don't do it.
I had a feeling that might be there. So, no.
No. I mean, look, it depends. You see, age is I think I've said this to you before, Luke. Age is a number. I don't relate to it. I don't relate to it in as much that people get sick in ill health at young ages. Some people are old before their time, outlook on life and all the rest of it. Um, I take my disposition in life right the way back to the spirit and the character of my mother, which followed through with us and stayed with us all the way through our lives, really. And I don't have a sort of thought that you're too old for anything. And that's pretty obvious because I went through a couple of wives on the way to the partner that I had my current children with. And I will say right up front, in case anybody says, "Oh, he's a bastard" or whatever it is, I will say that right up front, in case people think that I'm just a bad husband, that I still have a full and good relationship with my first wife of my 2 oldest children. We don't see an awful lot of each other because of our geographic proximity, but we always have a good time together. There's no problem with the kids. My older kids are very, very happy about the fact that we don't have hassles. My second wife and I, we didn't have children, and yet I was only with her last week at the theatre. So we have an ongoing good and stable relationship. We don't have any animosity. We didn't have children, as I said, but my former partner, and I say former partner because we're not actually partners at the moment, but my former partner of nearly 18 odd years or whatever, we have got our oldest son together, 14 years old, just about to be 14 in December. And he was wanted, a beautiful love child. If ever there was a love child in this world, that was him. And then the miracle, how we became pregnant again. I say we because I might as well have been me. Pregnant again with a child we thought that turned out to be twins. And I suppose if you want to say that there's an upside, it's because they're all beautiful children and lovely children. But there's a difficulty along the way because all 3 have different levels on the spectrum of autism. And we're dealing with that on a day-to-day basis. But lovely children at the same time. So yes, I've got 5 children and 3 grandchildren with my older children. And I'm still producing shows, not producing, but I'm still doing lighting and stage sets for shows, and I'm working till the early hours of the morning, bumping out, and I'm still trying to keep on writing my books, and I'm busy and I don't even think about, I can't afford to think about retirement, and I can't afford to think about ailments and all the rest of it. I keep healthy of mind, healthy of body as much as I can, because I do like my Chardonnay, I have to tell you. But healthy of mind, and tomorrow's another day.
Keeps the doctor away.
Tomorrow's another day.
So in other words, it's a lot of work, but it's well worth it.
Yes, I think
is
so.
The advice.
Yep.
Is what you reckon there. In researching your latest series of books, The Little Dino Dudes, I was amazed to see that your first characters are almost 10 years old. Where did the idea of Little Dino Dudes come from, and what or who inspired the first dinosaur character, Bluey?
Well, for a start, I've always been an artist and very strongly on the caricature side since the Disney days. So that really was already there. When I had my son, James,
Who's
who's
14
now
now?
about to turn 14,
Yeah.
when he was a little lad, he loved dinosaurs, of course.
Yeah.
And so for one particular birthday, I drew up a dinosaur, which happened to be my character Bluey, and I dedicated that. I combined his image with an A.A. Milne verse where Christopher Robin is speaking to Winnie the Pooh, and the words of that it's just beautiful. It's just telling him how much he loves you and all the rest of it.
Yeah.
And I just filled James's name in. You know, James, you are more beautiful than you'll ever know, or whatever. I can't, in this instance, repeat every word from memory, but they are absolutely stunningly beautiful words. And I put James's name up front. Before I know it, I've got other members of the family wanting one. Because James was so protective of his character, I had to invent other characters. And in the end, somebody then turned around to me and said, I would like one for little Petunia or whoever. And I don't want a boy, I want a girl. So then I had to draw a girl. So I ended up with a family of 4 dinosaur boys and 4 dinosaur girls. And they are my family of Little Dino Dudes for that particular series of books. Not limited to the fact that I've written other books outside of that particular value series. And I've got other dinosaur characters involved in that.
So the Little Dino Dudes, so you've got other dinosaur characters outside of the Little Dino Dudes?
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, I've written. I'm actually quite excited about it, but look, and yet not excited about it. Let me explain one thing. Like, coming from a publishing background and advertising background, so I'm reasonably sort of well informed that it's not going to always rain dollars on you, and you know it's going to be a hard road. So, in other words, even though I've got number 2 book in the series of the values series that I've written, I've got number 2 book illustrated and written, the chances of it seeing print are virtually nil until I can make number 1 book fully successful.
Yeah.
And number 1 book is going to be successful, hopefully outside of Australia and into other jurisdictions around the world.
I hope so.
And until such time that I get past the point whereby I have a need for reprint of the first book, the second book's not going to follow because it doesn't make any sense, you know. And so I'm really trying to work hard with this, the promoting of this book. It's easier said than done because coming from a publishing, I keep saying that, coming from a publishing background, but it makes me very wise to certain things. Publishers are not interested in you. You know, unless you've got a proven track record of selling books, they're not going to publish you. And so, because they're only interested in spending money on licenses. You know, they'll buy Peppa Pig, they'll buy, you know, licenses for Disney ranges and whatever. And because they know that there's a laid down misere market out there for these books. You know, whereas if they go to come and publish me, they not only got to pay for the printing and all the rest of it, but they've got to invest heavily in promoting me so that I'm an inspired author. So they're not going to do it. So, and as for the path down, which so many people fall into the trap of, you know, we'd love to publish your book. We're out there looking for titles. Be very aware of that. Is not always the case. The fact is that they're casting a big net to see how many people out there have written a book who want to get their book published. And that on that path of doing that, you get what you call a vanity. You know, you're the author, you're vain. You've written this book, you want to get it published. Somebody over there says, oh, what a beautiful book, we'll publish it. Next thing you know, you're on their list of books and they're publishing you, but they need 10 grand, 15 grand from you to make it happen. It's your contribution. And the reason why it's your contribution, because it's got to be taken careful in the first instance because you're an unknown author. So it leaves you to the only option left, and that is self-publishing.
Yeah.
And so self-publishing means you take on the whole blooming thing yourself. You're going to pay for the printing. You're going to worry about the marketing and distribution yourself. And that's the path I'm in. And even though I think my book, because I've got a certain standard, I have to say, of producing because of my background of books production. It had to be right.
Yeah.
It's beautifully bound. It's beautifully printed, and it's a very substantial, good book. I've checked the what I call the recommended retail price before I even went out into it to make sure I was keeping within a bracket of acceptability. And the book, I think, I wrote it on the basis of it being not just a storybook. I didn't want to just write a storybook. If I did that, it would end up on the bonfire down the local park. You know, I had to find something that had a difference, and my difference was values. And my son going to Macquarie College, I'd be waiting there for him, and all the values that the school stands for would be up around the different window boardings. They stood for this, or they stood for that. And I thought, that's what I'm going to do. My dinosaurs are going to teach values to children because they need those values to be taught. And it's recommended that really, you know, give or take here and there, but that these kids should be familiar with these values by the age 5. And that's what I've done. I've incorporated values into the first book. I've already illustrated and written the values into the second book, and I've got a stack of values is arm's length long to continue the series if it ever gets successful.
Yeah. That's interesting. That's where the values come from.
Yep.
That's very cool. I was also amazed to see that the characters actually started life on shirts and baby jumpsuits and of the like.
Yeah.
Before books. What inspired you to move it from the characters from that to books?
Yeah, well, obviously, being a hobby, the very first thing you do is produce a poster. You know, because I was personalising the poster, it meant that that poster now could be Kathy, Liza, Tommy, Dick, whatever, Harry. You know, so you personalise the poster, and that was becoming very popular. And then I would add the name Asaurus to the child. So if it was Peter, it was Peterosaurus, Timosaurus, Luciosaurus, and that was then with whatever character you wanted on the T-shirt. So you had, and then we only kept them white or pink T-shirts, you know, but boy and girl T-shirts. And so I was picking up orders for that and selling them at markets, taking orders at local markets. And then until I got invited to go to the Australian Museum and do my thing at the museum, and where I was doing heaps of orders for T-shirts and posters at the museum. But the quantum leap from that to a book happened purely and simply because of COVID. Simply because of COVID. Because prior to COVID, I was still not producing, sorry, I was at that stage, I was actually still providing production services for shows. And then COVID stopped the shows. So not only were the artists not getting work, the production people weren't getting any work either. And everybody that worked and serviced in the venues to do with theatre and entertainment weren't getting any work. And I had to decide what I was going to do. So it was simply for me, pick up an old cap, you know, and take my characters one step further. And so I had my adequate amount of Chardonnay, which inspired my writing. And I sat down and I can't tell you how I did it, because if you ask me how I did it today, I've always loved writing. And I've always been, I think, reasonably literate. And English has always been a sort of a subject that I was reasonably good at, I suppose, if you want to put it that way. I could write, and a lot of it. And I love humour. I'm very much into humour. Everything I write humorously. So I prior to doing this book on Dino Dudes, I'd actually written up some ideas in my head on a couple of other books. One was a murder mystery, and the other was like more about a rock chick type movie thing. I'd been on tour with some dancers and wrote up a book about my experiences of going on tour as a roadie with these people. And then I wrote a cookbook. Don't ask me why. I'm from Devon. I love scones. So I wrote 101 scone recipes and so on and so forth. But when it came down to this book, I knew I was going to go for the values. I picked the values that I wanted to write about, and the brain just got going. And before I know it, almost one after the other, I wrote 8 stories. And I've combined them into the first 2 books, and there's many more if I want to use them.
So the books only came about at the beginning of COVID?
Yeah, that's the whole reason I did
Awesome.
it, was because I had to find another vocation. And what I
What
thought
about
about,
the you were already doing the jumpsuits and the shirts and stuff? That
yeah,
wasn't.
I was already doing that.
Yeah.
And I held back from that. I haven't done any jumpsuits for shirts and things for a while. Yeah, I still got the press,
Yeah.
but I haven't done that for a while because I got so sidetracked on the book.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's been an interesting sort of diversion, you might call it, in a way, and it's still evolving. I'm still evolving. I produced, or I didn't, but Yvonne, my former partner, made the characters in China with a soft toy manufacturer in China.
Plush toys. Yeah.
Plush
I've
toys
seen them, yeah.
had the characters made, and honestly, they are to die for.
They're amazing. I remember seeing
Absolutely
one.
to die for. I mean, I'm in love with them myself, and this was not even the best quality that they could do. It
Yeah.
cost us enough money to get this done,
Yeah.
but to think that they could have done better, I can't believe it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's again a future. They're never going to be made in bulk unless I can establish my market.
Yeah.
And I'm fortunate that now I've got an internet marketing company come on board, and they're now forming my account on Shopify. They've only just in this last week has that actually taken place. So if you actually look at Little Dino Dudes online, it won't be a very impressive site at this point.
Yeah.
Because it's to be graphically improved and all sorts to happen to it.
Yeah.
But at least it's going to be there, and you'll be able to actually look at ordering anything from us on Shopify in the future. But in the meantime, of course, you've got to come to me direct.
Which is fine. I mean, and the amazing illustrations that are in that book. Your illustrations are they're very good.
Thank you, Luke.
So you have been an illustrator, which is obviously through the books and all these dinosaur characters and any of the characters that I've seen of your drawings. Designer, producer, director throughout your life, and you've touched on it already, like your kids' books. Had you written what other books had you written before that? And you've always had a passion for writing, and books prior to Little Dino Dudes.
Yeah, I'd have to go back into, because my studio that I ran Spot Graphics out of Brisbane.
Yeah.
Was offering services to advertising agencies and particularly to publishers. So I was off every month down from Brisbane, down to Sydney, down to Melbourne to visit a string of publishers,
Yeah.
of which I was offering publishing services. Now, some of those along the way, when you're producing something, you automatically find yourself doing what we call sub-editing. You're not actually You're not editing to the point whereby you're rewriting things for people, because that's not your job. But there is a difference between proofreading, where you're picking up obvious errors, to sub-editing, where you're adding the odd full stop and semicolon and paragraph breaks and things like this that make sense along the way of the copy, and it just starts to become second nature to you as you write. Plus, I've got one of those imaginations that, like, I'll give you a small example. If you remember, Julian Lesage was stuck in the embassy and couldn't get out.
The story could go anywhere.
Yeah, well, he was at the Ecuadorian embassy,
Yeah.
and
Yes, I do remember.
and whatever. And I crossed an experience I had. I was in Las Vegas, and I'd had a meeting with a company in Los Angeles who were special effects company, and they had designed all the special effects for Backburn, which was a film all about this fire, Backburn, and another one, Jurassic Park, on the first series, where the car goes over the cliff and all the rest of it.
Yep.
They built and engineered all those special effects, and Jaws and an earthquake and stuff like this. An amazing company, and they had designed the special apparatus at the Monaco, which was only just being fitted out, the Monaco Casino in Vegas, and they had had a guy called Lance Burton, who's one of the top magicians known in the world today. Um, they had a 10-year contract on Lance Burton in this Monaco casino, and they were building this equipment that allowed Lance Burton to disappear on stage in what seemed like seconds, reappear in the chandelier in the roof. And there's a psychology behind that. It's sort of known that, and I think I'm right in saying this, so don't necessarily send me emails correcting me. But something like 15 seconds is the science behind the human brain seeing something, sorting it out in the brain is the realism of it, and actually coming up with an answer.
Yeah.
That 15 seconds. So they had to make Lance Burton disappear on stage and appear in the chandelier in 15 seconds. Simple as that.
Yeah.
Now, how do you do that? And it was how they did it. And I don't need to go into that because the interview will go on for another half hour.
Yeah.
But how they did it inspired me to write a book called The Sting. And I've still got it. Nobody's ever looked at it. And if somebody wants it, please give me a call. But called The Sting, where I've got, using the Lance Burton's trick, I actually extract Assange from the embassy under the nose of every scrutineer. And yeah, that's how my brain works.
There you go. So that's how the books go. Well, that's quite a distance from a children's book teaching values. So that's interesting.
Oh yeah, but then I had kids involved then. See,
Yeah.
they're the motivation then.
That's right. That's exactly right. So you mentioned, I think it was Barry from Aristocrat. It was someone from Aristocrat. About the influences in your life. What personal influences and experiences have you had that have had the biggest impact on your work?
Oh, on my work. Oh, that's a real hard one because I did say when you asked me something similar to that before, that Len Ainsworth. I'd have to come back to Len Ainsworth. I really would, because you see, he is an influence on me, never giving up in terms of age, I think.
Yeah.
But in terms of work,
in terms of your illustrations, like where does that inspiration?
I don't know,
come from?
because to be honest with you, and I mean this with all tongue in cheek, I don't see my work in the same way that others do, and I often sort of sit there going, really, you really think they're that good, because I actually still, if I were to be honest with myself, I'm still jaws dropped by other people's work, and I think I've got a talent, but I can tell you now that I don't put that talent as being a good illustrator. I think that my talent is that I always been able to see a big picture. I've always been able to see the result of what could happen. When I was doing, I didn't mention this before, but when I started my business first after Aristocrat, I was doing design in interiors for mostly gaming rooms, but gaming rooms or bistros for clubs and hotels. And why was I doing it? I wasn't a trained interior designer. I wasn't a trained architect. I wasn't a builder. I wasn't anything else. No, I was a visionary. But I also, because I had been in construction with my swimming pool and landscape business years before, I could see that you couldn't knock that wall down because it was a structural wall. You couldn't take that beam away because the blooming first floor would fall in.
Yeah.
I mean, I had a fair common sense approach. And because I could draw, I used to go along to the club and hoteliers to talk about what they could do. And then I'd give them a full artist impression of what it would look like when it was finished, and a plan of what had to be done. And that made the big difference. But I loved that. I got that from the swimming pool days, because we'd go into a person's house, like one of another 6 swimming pool companies that were going to come in and quote.
Yeah.
But I'd come in, and while my partner was out talking to them about the pools they could have, I'd be out in the garden doing an artist's impression of what it would look like when it was finished. just carried through really in terms of interior design, and so I,
And how quickly would you knock up one of those artist impressions out of curiosity, like whilst you're there?
as long as
Like 20 minutes, half an hour? Like,
oh, yeah, less than that.
Yeah.
I could. It depends. I mean, you could do your idea down on paper in a matter of a couple of minutes.
Yeah.
But to make it that little bit more visually impressive for somebody else, you may have to spend a little bit more time on the rendering of it.
Yeah.
You know, and but you know, mostly I got the idea on paper. I never gave him the full thing there
Oh, yeah.
because we didn't want to. We wanted it to come with our quote. You know, so there was a bit of on-site meeting to when they received our quote formally.
Yeah.
I give a better render.
Yeah.
You know, and well, let's put it this way. The guy who I worked for in the company in Brisbane, which was one of the biggest swimming pool companies in Brisbane, doing concrete, freeform concrete pools as well as ingrown fiberglass pools. We were selling so many pools between us that he sacked the two salesmen who were always trying to make excuses for why they hadn't sold enough that month.
Yeah.
So I loved it. I loved everything to do with construction, really.
Yeah. And I think touching back on like what you're saying about like you don't see your characters, I think there's something in that where we don't see our own ability like somebody else does. Yeah, I mean we're off track from the whole thing, but there's something there, and obviously that happens. It doesn't matter what, even though it is great. We all just don't see our own ability sometimes, or whatever somebody else
I can
sees.
surmise that. I can give us a conclusion to this.
Yeah, cool. I'll be open to that.
I spent many, many years, I'm talking about all my years through college, going through art college, all the years working in publishing and working on advertising, having my own studio, all the rest of it, always feeling inferior of my own work.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason for that is that I spent far too much time comparing myself with other people. And I'd be sitting there thinking, oh, I wish I could draw like that, or I wish I could do like that, or I wish I could do like this. And that is just negative energy, because there always will be people who are better at something than you. And if you're going to spend all your time worrying about why you can't be as good as them, you're never, ever going to make it, because they'll always be ahead of you.
Yeah.
Maybe you're spending your time on things you're not good at by comparing yourself, instead of spending the things on what you are good at, and then you'll find that you're actually on a par with them because you're actually good at something different to what they're doing.
Yeah.
And I went through all my adult life always considering my own work. So I'll be honest with you, I used to say to myself, Pete, you are the biggest cheat there ever was, you know? And why is that? Because, mate, you can sell something and make them believe it's better than it is. And that led to presentation. In other words, if you're going to do something for a client in advertising, just call it a logo or something.
Yeah.
You don't just do it on a piece of paper and hand the piece of paper to the client. Oh, no. You take the piece of paper, you put it in a mount, you put it in a folder, and then you do another little presentation concept around it. And now and then you write up what that logo is all about. Oh, that square meant this, and it ties in with your company like this. And do you know what you've done in the end is that you've presented something to your client that he can go down to his club or pub and say, oh yeah, this means this and this means, he can tell the story of what his logo is about. So in other words, it is professional bullshit.
Oh, it shows the amount of effort you're willing to put in, rather than you just
Well,
like slapstick.
it's not. I won't call it bullshit in terms of it's not important.
Yeah.
What I meant was, you are
It's a perception.
offering. It's a perception. Yes, you're right. It's a perception of what they're receiving as to what they could have received, and you've wrapped it up. If I gave you a Christmas present box of chocolates, you'd love the chocolates, wouldn't you? But if I gave it to you in a nice wrapping with a bow and I put your name on it and I handed it to you in a certain way or over a dinner or something, not that I'm in love with you, Luke, by the way, but it was the way in which it was all presented.
Yeah.
Then it means a lot more. Yeah, sure, you still got the chocolates and you're still just as grateful, but you've got something to add to it.
Like I said, it goes to show you put more effort.
And that's the same as presentation. I could do a picture for you right now on a piece of A4 paper, and you might go, oh yeah, that's good. But hang on a minute, I'll throw a 14 by 11 mount over it. I'll put it into a nice frame and I'll sign it, and all of a sudden it's got double the appreciativeness of it.
Absolutely. Well, because you put double the effort into the presentation of it.
Yeah. So what I found out about myself was that I was not what I thought talent was being able to draw better or design better was not my talent. My talent was that I could create the seed that others could germinate into something. They couldn't think, oh, what do we do? Oh, my God, we got this to do, or this car to launch, or we've got this and this to do, and how do we go about that? I'd give them the idea, and once they got the idea that none of them were capable of having, they'd all run with it, and go for it. And so that's where I had, I think, something to offer. And that's why the Aristocrat Leisure Industries, that for 6 years, I produced some of the biggest shows, launches and corporate shows around the world that was referred to, and I say this without tongue in cheek, I've been honest, that the CMA, President of the Club Managers Association, said that I'd not only set the bar for product promotion and launches here in New South Wales, but in Australia. And, nice thing for him to say, but it's actually true. And why was it true? Because there was nobody in my position of doing what I was doing without a committee in charge or somebody asking me to explain why. I had it all done before anybody asked me to explain why.
So the Little Dino Dudes books are devoted to teaching basic social values to our children. With your first book containing the first two values, honesty and justice, can you tell us a little bit about what the other values are going to be and why you feel it is so important to instill these values in our children?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, at my age, most people are quite happy to be granddad to their grandchildren. And I've still got to take on the role of dad. And unfortunately, and yet in some ways beautifully, I have 3 children that are on different levels of the spectrum for autism. And it's even more reminds you that such children that have got a brilliance in their head, by the way, they're sometimes miles ahead of us in what they're thinking and acting. The importance of basic values becomes even more important. And so my second book has determination, consideration, and love as the values in that book. But, there's all sorts to follow. I've listed integrity, faith, empowerment, courtesy, faithfulness, enthusiasm, self-control, humility, and cooperation. These are just the tip of the values that drive us into who we're going to be as human beings. But along the way, it's very important too to build in other incorporations into that. For argument's sake, I've got discover, search, learn, imagine, share, believe, create, grow, dream. These are aspects of the story that demonstrate those sorts of values. They're not values in themselves, or they could be values in themselves, but they're about learning how to be team and to live with each other and to cooperate with each other.
Ways of being.
And that led to me writing my first book in the series of the Treetop Book Club. Now, why did I write that? It's not anything to do with Little Dino Dudes' values. It's the same characters, by the way, and more. But the value of that is it's encouraging children to read, not just to listen to things, but to actually pick up a book and love a book for what it is and actually read the text and read the pages, look at the pictures, turn the pages, which is so important, because if we don't keep encouraging that, that be lost in our nature. We're already not listening to newspapers anymore, or reading newspapers, and on the trains as we always used to. It's probably great, Sydney Morning Herald out, you'd be blocking the vision out of people on either side of you. Now we're sitting with our little phones and iPads and looking at it. You're reading, yes, but it's not for the love of books, and that can help to. The Treetop Book Club is encouraging, and I hope for that series ever takes off, which it won't unless I can again get Little Dino Dudes going. But the Treetop Book Club is watching the values of children actually enjoying and loving the book for the book's sake, which means they've got to snuggle up in a corner somewhere, peace and quiet, put some headphones on, just read, picture, imagine, building up their own imagination around the text they're reading. And I have to say that I'm blessed that my 6-year-old twins love reading. Love reading, love drawing, love everything to do with expressing themselves on paper. And my son, my youngest son, woe betide you ever looking over his shoulder and reading the word out that he's trying to decipher on his own, because you're in trouble if you do, because he is determined by using the phonetic sounds that they're learning at school to work out what that word is and how to say it.
Yeah.
And I find that just smile goes on my face when I see
Determination, one of your values. It is. I watch my daughter learning to read at the moment, and watching it, listening to her break down words, and it's quite cool. It's quite nice to hear them break down a word, and then all of a sudden they say the word, and it's like, how cool is that?
James Thomas wasn't even 6. I mean, he was like in his early 5th year.
Yeah.
When he was working at the syllables, how many syllables a word had? Like if it was high, it was 1 syllable. If it was higher, it was 2 syllables.
Yeah.
And he'd be sitting there, and now he can't wait to sit down and work out mathematically how many 5s. All the maths he works out different ways.
Yeah.
And he's still so young. This is where the brilliance of some of these children come out, but they're so sadly lacking in the development of some parts of their brain that need medical assistance to help to settle certain parts of the brain, or to give a little bit more help to calm them down and things like that. You're weighing up all the time their brilliance on one hand and their struggles on the other, and the pain that they're going through.
Yeah.
Leave alone the pain we go through.
Yeah, well, but I mean, it is always very. You don't like to watch children struggle, yet struggle's sort of part of life. It's a strange thing,
Yeah, well, I mean, talking about that, I mean, in this day and age, I'm sure as we go on in more generations to come, I mean, things will be even smarter. I wonder how dumb we were in this gen. But right now, we're a lot more aware. There are more people out there now as occupational therapists and doing various psychological degrees on this and that and everything else. And still with only a modicum in many ways of knowledge, of real knowledge of where it's heading. But there's more sympathy to be able to say this child is diagnosed to be on the spectrum 1, 2, or 3 of autism or ADHD. Like, I'm 77, sure, but I can tell you now that even I can see by comparison and comparing myself with the children that I've got, that I think I've grown up with anxiety, autism, ADHD, the whole blooming lot.
Yeah, a lot of undiagnosed things
and
I didn't know about.
Was never diagnosed.
Yeah.
A whack across the ear was the way in which you got treated if you misbehave yourself. You can't do that with a child with autism.
Yeah.
As much as you feel one part of you want to go, you little devil, you did that, they're going to go and whack you across the head. It's the worst thing you can do.
Yeah.
You literally got to try to get their trust and calm them down, because they can't help it. They can't help what they've done.
Yeah.
And the moment that as they're calming down, there's a lot of regret on what they've done comes in their faces.
Yeah.
They didn't want to do it. They didn't mean to do it. You know, it's just that they can't help doing it. And but that wasn't recognised in my time.
Yeah, no.
You know, in my
Can't
time,
imagine.
corporate punishment was, yay, you know, I can imagine the teachers all getting together in the canteen going, who did you hit with your blooming music book today? Oh, I whacked it across from the stage at this kid right in the temple. Beautiful, you know. It doesn't happen now. God, you'd be in
It's
prison.
interesting. Actually, when I was in primary school, they still had the cane.
Yeah,
Like
we
when
did.
I was in primary school, the cane. I was talking to my wife the other day,
Did you really?
and she was like, "We didn't have the cane." Like, she was 4 years difference, and she's like, "I don't remember the cane." I'm like, "Yeah, when I was in primary school, I remember friends like not
Wow.
necessarily close friends, but I knew
Yeah.
kids that got taken down and got the cane."
Yeah. No,
But
I
it
don't.
must have ended just like I must have been like one of the last.
Look, I never knew any different, nor did anybody of my generation. I mean, you know, we were naughty and we took it. You know, we were had our noses out of joint if we weren't guilty.
Yeah.
But we took it. But you know, I feel not so much for teachers delivering punishment, which they shouldn't do, but I feel for in this day and age too, the one thing that's out of control and it's not controlled is domestic violence and domestic violence against kids. And I mean, you imagine, you know, my children, who especially my youngest boy, who you could move a salt pepper from one side of the room to the other, and because he wasn't expecting you to move it, without even you knowing it, you'll go off like you wouldn't believe it. And some parents would whack that child from here to kingdom come for it, because you know they're drinkers, they're blooming drug people on drugs, and there's general blooming that type of home where they were, and I'm not talking necessarily poor homes. This happens according to a person's desire to enforce their superior strength and will onto others. You know, those kids don't get treated because of their condition. They get treated because they think they've been done something bad.
Yeah. Lastly, after meeting you, and I know at 76, I see no signs of you slowing down. And as you mentioned, the age is just a number, provided you have good health. Can you share how you stay young in mind and body?
Whew. Well, mentally, I still think that I can do a backward somersault, you know, and the only way that you get me to do it nowadays is to wager me a very good bet, and then I would see how much of that I was going to win was going to repair my neck, and then I'd weigh up whether it was worth the balance of doing it. Yeah, look, I think everybody can relate to this. I mean, we're all young in the head, if we're not in the body. I've always worked, well, for a lot of years, let's put it that way, in an industry where there's no particular age barrier. In the entertainment industry, whether you're as a producer or whether you're as a performer or whether you're a production person, you have equal respect for those other people that you're working with. And they could be old roadies working with young roadies. They could be old singers working with up-and-coming new singers. The new singers have respect for the older singer because of their reputation, and the young roadie has respect for the older roadie because the older roadie is either guiding him with very good advice or can still scale a 3-meter ladder as quick as he can.
Yeah.
You know, I've always been fit, thank goodness. I've always bumped in, bumped out, even when I was with Aristocrat, where I was in charge. I didn't have to. I could wear my suit and go off to the cocktail parties, but I'd be there bumping out or bumping in. That's always been the way with me. So
And for anybody that doesn't know, that's setting up and pulling it down.
I'm physically strong.
Yeah.
I'm mentally alert. I've got a good look on the humorous side of life. I'm a bit of a comic.
Yeah.
I like the funny side of things, which they say humor keeps you young anyhow. I've always had long hair, so it's not as if I'd suddenly decided I was going to be a long-haired old man. I've always had long hair. I've dressed in black more years than I can point a stick at, and it's going to be the boring colour at my funeral, I think, because I've always worn black. I used to be called the Man in Black in a couple of articles that was written about me. They refer to me as the Man in Black in the gaming industry, that is.
Yeah.
So there you go. Your long hair. You're not necessarily overweight. You're strong. You've got a good outlook on life. You like a Chardonnay. You don't run to the doctor every time you got a bruise. It's just the way you are, and I can't see any change in that. I can't see things changing. I mean, I think that one day, hopefully, and I say this with tongue in cheek, but hopefully, I'm going to be a Cornish saying, I'm going to wake up dead. You know what I mean? I'm not going to actually.
You're going to stay this active and healthy.
I'm going to stay active and healthy, and I'm still inspired by challenges. Somebody asked me actually only the other day, how would I react to if I was offered a really big launch role or some big production role again? And I gave that a bit of serious thought, because the reason why I was so successful with Aristocrat, and to some degree with my own company that went for 18 years, by the way, the reason why I was successful there is simply because I was always available.
Yeah.
I always made myself
on.
available. I didn't hide away from challenges, and I knew so many people. I mean, if I wanted to build a stand in England, I knew the company to go to, and they would build the stand. And if I wanted to, they would take it to Africa because that was the best for them to do that and put it up in Africa. And the same when I was building in North America, they would take Brazil in and do Brazil for me and things like that. So I had contacts everywhere. And when I had the Paralympics, sat on the Paralympic committee to launch Team 2000, that was just I had all the confidence in the world, and I'd already been working with some of those top production houses anyhow.
Yeah.
Chameleon and Norwest. They were the people I'd worked with. So I had no hassle to think about that. And when I started my company, just before I actually started it, and this sounds like a big story, but it's true. I had put my name down with a big advertising agency, employment agency, specialist employment agency, and I was on the final two decision makers for the role of Director General of the Royal Easter Show.
Yeah.
An absolutely true story. This lady got it over me. God bless her. There's no points for running second. We know that. But that's where my confidence level was.
Yeah.
So would I do it today? My vanity and conceitedness would say yes. Somehow or other I would do it. But it wouldn't go down to whether I feel I could do it these days. It would come down to how much trust are you going to put in me? Because if you expect me to produce what I think I could produce and sit on a committee of people who shouldn't be there, I honestly don't think I could do that.
Yeah.
I'm
old school.
I'm a very much this is my reputation. Take my trust, build in all the safeguards you want, but let me go. There used to be a saying at one time that if you've only got 24 hours, because a lot of people are like that, they leave things to the last minute. And then all of a sudden, oh God, it's happening tomorrow. They'd say, if you've only got 24 hours left to do the job, give it to Peter Lee. He's the only bloke who'll get it done in 24 hours.
Yeah.
And that's because you think according to your means. Of course, you don't think of something that's going to take 2 weeks that you've got 24 hours to do. What you do is you think of what I can do in 24 hours that will have the best impact possible, And those are the challenges I like. And I think that they're in themselves creative.
Yeah.
That's where I used to get lost, thinking creativity was how well I could draw. It's not how well I can draw. And I can tell you now, because I long lost that problem about me having to draw that well,
Yeah.
I'm a better illustrator now than I ever was.
Yeah.
Because I illustrate now with a free heart. I don't give a stuff what anybody else thinks about it.
Yeah.
You know, because I illustrate with a freeness. I'm not comparing myself with anybody. I'm comparing myself with me. You like it, you like it. You don't, you don't.
So
So
I think that it sort of feels like it's to keep the mind and body active and live with the freeness.
it's healthy living too, you know, and
Yeah.
it's not only just a rule that can follow you through with your work.
Yeah.
It's a rule that will help you follow through with how you work with other people
Yeah.
and how you want to be perceived.
Yeah.
I think that I've got the majority of friends, so I'm sure there's a lot of people out there who think I'm just a big-headed, white-haired bastard who, you know, who's too full of his own stuff. You know, that's fine too, you know.
Yeah.
But if I've done anything wrong and on anything, it would plague me forever.
Yeah.
You know, I've got a couple of jobs that the client honestly would not have known what happened, but I know what happened production-wise. And it's always been a terror in my thinking. Oh my God, that job. Oh, this. But no, it was never a point where anybody ever come out and complain, honestly, or wouldn't pay me.
Yeah.
But I knew what happened,
Yeah.
and there's very few of those. Fortunately, there's very few of those.
Yeah.
Mostly, I've managed to. And again, I come back to it. Presentation is everything.
Yeah.
And I don't just say presentation, I say I am a very good cheat. I know how to wrap something up to please somebody.
Yeah.
And it's every time it's come down to presentation. How I've presented it on that day to that person.
Yeah.
And that makes the world of difference to it. And I think that if I was to say to any young person coming up through, it must be very difficult these days with anybody thinking, oh, what am I going to do with my life and blah, blah, blah. You're actually in a better position than ever before because you've got, whereas you got over here, machines and technology taking over this and taking over that, you've also got that ability to use those tools that were never ever available to our generations to work for you. So, you know, don't be always have confidence in yourself. And if you haven't got confidence in yourself, then don't push it too much to the fore. Try to ease it into situations that you're being challenged.
Develop it.
Build up a good foundation. It's the same with anything. You can't build a house unless you've got a good foundation. You can't build life unless you've got a foundation. And you've got to always have something that's backing you, holding you up there.
Yeah.
And it could be family.
Yeah.
In some instances, depending on what you do, it could be financial stability.
Yeah.
In a lot of ways, it's just self-confidence.
Yeah.
Presentation. You don't have to be a Madonna to go out there and turn heads.
Yeah.
You know, sometimes people paint their lips black and their hair peroxide white. That turns heads as well, doesn't it? You don't even stop sometimes to think whether they're good looking or not. So it's just try to be as confident as you can in life, and
There you go.
don't let money be your guide to how successful you've been.
Yeah.
It's not how much you've made in money.
Yeah.
There are many people out there that's undesirable characters who actually own everything around them.
Yeah.
But they're just miserable on people. And there are people with no money at all, but with the beautiful personalities and heart.
Yeah.
And that attracts friends to them. And that is a wealth, isn't it?
Yeah. Oh, massively. Yeah.
And and as I say, one of the things you did ask me was about my age and having a young family. I don't even want to think about personally why and how I ended up with this family. To me, that's a natural sort of course. And I've got difficult children in some ways.
Yeah.
But difficult children are also, in their own way, beautiful children who wouldn't be who they are if they didn't have the problems that they were suffering or the disability that they've got. And they wouldn't be the people they are. And so I just sometimes I just sit there, and I honestly mean this. On God's honor, I'll sit down and be having a cup of tea or whatever, and I'm looking at little Stella playing with her Barbie dolls in a world of her own, talking her voice as if they're talking, and watching her playing there, and I just think how beautiful that is. And then I look over at Thomas, who's actually the second born, sitting down there, good or for bad, with his Nintendo, playing some game that skill level should be way out of his capability, and yet he's creating something, and he's in his head and developing his brain in ways that we never even knew could be developed. We weren't challenged. We didn't know. There are older kids now at 6-year-old than we were.
Yeah,
at 6-year-old, we were still babies, really.
Yeah.
Today, they're sitting down with Nintendos, and they're already this and that. We're showing up. This is one thing that technology has done or doing, in my book, is it's showing what the human mind is capable of, which was never ever challenged in my day, because it never had the way of being challenged.
That's
I think
very
it's just
amazing.
incredible.
That's a very,
what
very
kids are doing.
interesting and cool way to look at that. But yeah, it's very true. Very true. Well, Peter, thank you very much for your time today. If anyone would like to see Peter illustrate the amazing characters of Little Dino Dudes, please go to his Facebook page, Little Dino Dudes, where you can also purchase his latest book by emailing littledinodudes@gmail.com. Once again, thank you very much today, Peter, and I look forward to seeing, hopefully they make it out there after today's discussion, the coming Little Dino Dudes in the series.
Yeah.
Thank you, Peter.
Thank you very much, Luke. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Coffee with the Coastie is brought to you by On the Coast Publications, the publishing house for On the Coast families and On the Coast over 55 community magazines on the central coast of New South Wales.